Okay, we're going to start then. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Norfolk Chamber panel discussion. This week's panel discussion is on diversity and inclusion. I'm delighted we've got a great panel. We've got Judeline Nicholas, who has very kindly stepped in at literally the last minute because unfortunately Rebecca Lewis-Smith from Fountain Partnership couldn't make it because of family illness. Which we understand isn't necessarily serious, but that's okay. We have Richard Ross from Chadwicks. We have Rachel Blackburn, a director at Us to You Consulting, and we have Lynn Walters, who is executive director at Pure Recruitment. So I'm very pleased that all four can join us, and I'll get them to do a very quick 30-second intro in a minute. I just wanted to go through some sort of housekeeping rules. One, you can chat amongst yourself, attendees, on the chat function. I've asked our panelists not to follow the chat because I want them to follow each other's conversation and listen to that rather than getting distracted. So if you're putting stuff in the chat, don't expect us to respond to it. If you actually have a specific question, and that is a question where you're looking for an answer rather than just trying to make a long statement. So something you could put in a tweet that has a question mark at the end to be quite precise. Then you can use the Q&A function to do that. And we will look at Q&As at the end. But please keep your questions short, partly because we have to read them on screen. And if we're trying to work out what the question is, it makes it quite hard. We might just have to ignore it. Just to talk around what we're going to discuss today. So diversity and inclusion is a huge topic. I mean, the idea of diversity, what types of diversity, we were looking at it, we've got about 8 different types. One could talk about cultural, ethnic, sex, gender orientation, disability, age, class, religious diversity, neurodiversity. There are lots of ways of talking about it. And we really want to focus today on the business benefits of diversity. We're taking a decision that we're going to accept the moral argument we should treat people well, we should treat them equally and equitably. We shouldn't discriminate against people based on color, creed, dress, tattoos, whatever it might be. We're going to accept that, and that's not the debate. The debate here, the panel discussion, we're assuming you're here to learn, is what can you do as business leaders to build diversity and inclusion into your business, to make it real, and what are the benefits for you? So that's the angle we're taking. If you came here thinking it was going to be something else, then I apologize for disappointing you. But hopefully you'll be happy with that. We've only got an hour of discussion. We'll then have about 20 minutes or so of Q&A. Like I say, if you want to post a question, please use the Q&A function, which is on your toolbar at the bottom of the screen, should pop up for you. And that would be good. So let me just check this. Okay. I would like to ask our panelists just very quickly, a quick 30-second introduction. I'll start with Judeline because you're in the middle of my screen here. And we'll go Judeline, Richard, Rachel, and then Lynn. So off we go.
That was so kind of you to put me on first. So thank you. Right, I work with organisations around their people skills, because if you've got an engaged organisation, the talent you're tapping into is enormous. And one of those things are you actually looking at your customers? Are you looking at your brand? Where are you going with all of this? And if you haven't got that root resource and you're not really investing in it, you've wasted a lot of time. Do you remember that old phrase, our people are our most valuable resource? It was true. And that's what I enable people to look at. So that lovely phrase, diversity is about being invited to the dance, being included, would be invited to dance itself. But equity is actually about having a voice. So investing in people so they have a voice and they can move your business along is key.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nice summary. Good. Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Ross. I run a small financial services company, wealth management company called Chadwicks, and we regard ourselves as being a learning organisation. And we try and create, share spread knowledge. I'm interested in the way that knowledge is shared amongst businesses, how new knowledge is created. We're also very interested in behavioural economics. I've studied it as a postgrad, and looking at ways that we can encourage people using psychological insights to behavioural insights to encourage people to develop different behaviours. And my interest in diversity is that diverse organisations create new knowledge, and it's as simple as that, really. And so that's my starting point with diversity, is that if we have diverse opinions, diverse knowledge coming in, then we can create new knowledge, we can be more innovative, we can be better businesses. That's where I'm coming from.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Rachel.
Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, so Rachel Blackburn, Us2 Consulting. It's interesting listening to the other panelists. I think a lot of my motivations time with what the other two people have said, in particular Judeline's points about justice and having the right skills, giving people a voice. I think some of the driving forces that drive me are very, very in line with that. Us2 Consulting, we work with businesses to achieve lots of different aspects of positive change. Diversity may be one of those pieces, as long as business strategy, branding, marketing, other things as well. However, recognising, as the other speakers have said so far, if we can get diversity right, we're tapping into so much potential, which then drives the moral argument as well. And our strapline is guaranteed to make a positive difference. So we recognise diversity is part of that jigsaw puzzle that makes a positive difference.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Lynn.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Lynn Walters. I founded Pure, the professional recruitment company across our region. We've got an office in Norwich and the Eastern region as well, other offices. And I run Pure Executive, the search division. So where I'm hoping to come from and contribute to the discussion today is from a recruitment perspective, and how you can get the best and sort of really use recruitment to drive diversity in your organisation. As part of what we do, I set up a women's leadership programme back in 2014, specifically for our region, so that we could make sure that we had more females coming through, contributing to diversity at board level and senior management level. And that has shifted, and that's where a lot of my attention has been, to be honest, in terms of the diversity agenda up until lockdown. And then it was really sort of the events that I saw around George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter campaign that really got me thinking differently, and started thinking much broader and thinking, is there more that we could do to drive that, racist or anti-racist agenda? So that, so really, I guess I'm being really honest that I'm on a journey with many of you, but I hope that I can really contribute from a recruitment perspective.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to, I know you've all mentioned some of the benefits of workplace diversity, but I'd like to just come back and very quickly get what's your top line takeaway? What would be the one, if you had that 30-second slot, to say, why is diversity good for your business? What can it do for you? What's the positive for you? What would be your number one sort of message? And so I'll go to, since you finished, Lynn, I'll go to Rachel first, and just get that one message out there.
Yeah, clearly, building on what we said in the introductions, I think we recognise diversity would be great if we can get it right. I think we've got the underlying thing of legislation. If we can get it wrong, we know the consequences can be very disruptive, very time consuming, very emotionally draining, very expensive. So if we get it right, I think we can see locally, just to give a very practical case study of one of the most diverse organisations that I work with locally. ABC Taxi's got over 21 nationalities working in the business. Again, it's not straightforward. It can be bumpy. There's certain procedures, policies, recruitment elements, training, inductions. They have to invest in making films, working with us to make sure everyone knows the principles, the standards, what they can do, what they can't do. We encourage everyone to speak in English, etc. But if we look at that, in the last 12 years, the organisation's grown from 60 drivers to 260. And as we say, recognising we've now got a really diverse workforce, which then, going back to the marketing piece, is able to give great service to a very interesting demographic and diverse demographic of people in Norfolk as well.
Right, so it's that relationship with your customers that also benefits. It's not just an internal thing. Good stuff. So Judeline, I'll come to you, and then I'll go to Richard, and then I'll go to Lynn, because I want to, Lynn, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is more about the recruitment and the talent, getting that talent pool and expanding your talent pool. So, because I'm very conscious that if we are not diverse in our approach, if we exclude a certain section of society, you're restricting your talent pool, and in the hunt for talent, that's going to be a big challenge. So, but Judeline, what would be your big business takeaway?
Well, I'm conscious of the question that you're going to ask, Lynn, so hopefully it hasn't taken a little bit away from that. But we have been through the mill as a country, in terms of business over the last few months. And we have to think about, are we going to be fit for the future? Are we going to be the company of choice for people who have those talents to make us fit for the future? So that's the key element that we are in a perfect storm to recognise and to act on. That lots of people have gone away and rechecked their values. Am I a good fit for the organisation? Is the organisation a good fit for me?
Right.
Yeah. We are looking inwards for that talent. We're going to invest in that talent. So Lynn is an amazing sort of role that she's playing about putting us together and getting that recruitment happening. And so it is very much about looking at, what's the return on our investment?
Okay.
So that's where I would be thinking, fit for the future. That's a key element for diversity.
Well, thank you for mentioning the return on investment. I'll come to Richard now, because I'm thinking from a financial point of view. I've seen stuff saying that boards where you've got 30% or more who are women tend to have better productivity growth with employees. They tend to perform better on other measures, such as their environmental policies. I'm just wondering what your take, whether there's some particular financial aspect you think is important for the business, or whether you've got a different take on what's the most important thing for business. Why diversity is so important.
I think just to sort of come back to Judeline's point just for a second, is that in times of chaos like this, everything's up in the air. It's down to us to decide how it's going to land. We've got an opportunity now to make real change happen quickly. We've seen things like home working, how quickly everyone adapted in a time of sort of chaos and crisis. So I think there's a real opportunity here. There's no doubt at all that more diverse teams perform better financially in a lot of areas. I think one of the things which attracts me most is this idea of 2D diversity. So you have your acquired diversity and you have your innate diversity. So your innate diversity is your, it's not the right term, Judeline, but you know what I mean. It's the stuff you're born with, and the acquired stuff is the stuff you pull along, your biases you pull along, or your cultural influences or whatever. Companies that have leaders that recognise the benefits of 2D diversity are 70% more likely to develop products in a new market. That's huge. 70% is huge. And so you're just having that sort of different perspectives coming into your thought process. It's incredibly valuable, and it produces tangible results. There, that's it. My 30 seconds.
Lovely. That's really good. So I'm going to come to Lynn now, because I know your expertise is in the recruitment sector, and actually it was a question we had already, but I'd like to also credit Aisha Christian from Norfolk and Waveney Mind. Sorry for getting that wrong. Aisha is HR manager, and her question was very much along the lines of how does an organisation start the process of embedding diversity and inclusion in an organisational culture? Where do you start? And this was actually my second question: is sort of, how do you go about doing this? What's your starting point? Okay. And it strikes me that one place is going to be in recruitment. How you go about presenting yourself to the world must surely matter about who you attract. So, Lynn, over to you. Can you give me an insight on this?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for your question, Aisha. I hope I've pronounced your name right. I look at it in two ways. So recruitment can really help bring in diversity. And then in terms of tackling inclusion, it's then all about how do you bring in, how do you induct, how do you create a culture which means that you can listen to people's experiences and make it a good, inclusive culture where people want to stay? Because if you haven't got the inclusion right, then you can do all you can in terms of recruitment, but then you're going to lose them because you haven't got the right culture. So I guess my sort of really simple tip, and the thing that has really, really changed for me over the last couple of years, particularly when it comes to board level and senior management recruitment, where it's harder, is it's about noticing and paying attention to diversity. And I can't tell you what a difference it makes. So if I'm working with a CEO or a chairman who wants to recruit onto their board, and they say to me, okay, what sort of diversity have you got in your shortlist? It's sort of then an open door, and we're just really joined up in terms of making sure that we're really broad and think differently and think laterally about the talent that we go out. And just then every time before I go and present any shortlist, what I'll always be questioning myself and my team will be doing is, what sort of diversity have we got? And as I said before, you know, where really I've paid attention to till now, and I'm not sure I feel great about this, is about looking at the gender diversity, and we sort of measure those statistics, but I haven't particularly paid attention to the other diversity aspects. And that's one of the things that I think that I'm right now really thinking about how I do that. But if you notice, you pay attention to it, and it's kind of coins that phrase, you know, like measure what matters. If you measure it, it gets done. So, and what I'm always doing, so whether or not I'm now working with the CEO that thinks in that way, I'm always with our team, we're always thinking about what is the balance? Have we thought broadly, or have we just gone to those normal places to identify the right talent?
Okay, so if you're now thinking about that, recruiting a diverse workforce, and thinking about East Anglia and Norfolk in particular, even Norwich, where culturally we're actually not that diverse. I think on the stats, you know, it's about 10% are what you might call non-white in their classification. Although I always think that the sort of white British makes us all sound like sliced white loaves. But you know, if you've got a fairly homogenous society, how do you make sure you're doing the right thing in recruitment to really make it open up so that people don't feel that they're always going to be on the outside looking in? Judeline, could I come to you first, and then we'll go to Rachel?
It's an interesting debate we're having, and there's going to be lots of words and phrases we use that are controversial. So I'd like to put on the table privilege, because I don't think that everyone, you know, has this notion of what white privilege is. I know that I'm not white, but I know I've got privilege. And I have to be honest about that, and I have to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations around that. So that when I look at the workforce, when I look at my staff group, when I look at who's there and engaged, you know, how have I enabled, how have I empowered that workforce to ask questions about why do we do that and why don't we do that? So we're having those open debates. What is the culture of my organization? So when you're saying, you know, where is this pool? We have to really ask those searching questions of ourselves is, what have we been recruiting to in the past? How do we label, you know, a key skill? And what does that look like then? In what shape does it come? Have we already said that doesn't look right because we haven't really investigated it further as to what purpose we're asking for? Now, I'm working a lot with organisations, so we must have a degree. I mean, that's been the biggest thing, isn't it? We must have a degree. Must have a degree in, you know, in geography. But what's it got to do with the job that you're actually doing? So we're talking about experience and expertise and skills and a knowledge base that doesn't always come from the education. And that's where we have to really invest our time in.
It does seem to be the default, isn't it? That you just say, oh, put a degree on it.
Put a degree on, yeah. And
what you're excluded 50%.
Absolutely. And you're not going to, and they may come with a degree, but have you got the attitude behind it that really is a good fit for your organisation? Have you got people that go, why do you do that? And how can we do that? and actually then really challenge our out-of-box thinking. It's not a hackneyed phrase, I'm so sorry, I had to throw that in. But it is, you know, are we actually broadening our horizons by asking why?
Yeah.
You know, so that's one of the things I would put down.
Okay, so Rachel, this brings me to you, and particularly coming back to your client, ABC Taxis. So was it 21 nationalities?
Yeah, 21 nationalities, I think is a really good example of how to do that. I think building on Judeline's point, I understand what you're saying about making sure that the selection criteria is broad enough. We're not just making assumptions about degrees. However, I think we shouldn't be here assuming that if somebody is a non-white person, they're not educated, because I think there's evidence that you can research showing that even when people have got a degree, if they're not white, then they're likely to lag behind. So we've still got to be really careful there. I think clearly a number of us work in the recruitment field on the panel, and I think we understand, traditionally been brought up, there are 3 things that we need to look for at the recruitment stage. Number 1, can they do the job? And I know we've got lots of people on the line working in HR as well, so we're very familiar with these things. Number 1, can they do the job? Number 2, are they motivated to do the job? And number 3, will they fit in? Now, going back to the context, we're in Norfolk, this whole thing about will they fit in the team is where it can get a bit sticky. So even when you've got things on the wall in line with your values about respecting and what have you, clearly, if you've never had a black person in the organisation, for example, then thinking, will they fit in? So these are things which clearly I've done some recruitment for different clients at different times. So it is a concern. We don't want to put somebody in an environment where people aren't going to be fit in. It could be disastrous from everyone's point of view. And don't forget underlying things to this that we're currently working with around mental health. I know we've got obviously the lady from Mind on the call, etc. We don't want to put people in a situation where it's going to destroy their mental health. Clearly that would be bad. But I do think we've got to challenge, it's around that fitting in thing. So we recognise, going back to some of the research we can see, and obviously like Lynn said, I've been on a journey, you know, in the last few months, even though we've done diversity for 15, 20 years, I think the agenda's really changed in the last few weeks. So I think if we recognise, in line with Judeline's point about privilege, we know that non-white people, for example, can be seen as a deviant from the norm. Something I hadn't really thought about actually, but when it comes to recruitment, it's like, oh, that's different. That's not the norm that we're expecting. We need to recognise that. Other comments that we come across when it comes to will people fit in? White people might not want to buy from a black person if we take the black person into the team. Again, it's something which I think I first heard that back in the 90s, but I have heard it at least once this year as well. So I think that's still a concern. And then one client's actually said to me, well, if our customer base is white and they wouldn't buy from a black person, do we actually want to have customers who are racist? So that's another huge debate, kind of big thing that's going on there, especially coming out of a pandemic, when most businesses want all the customers they can get their hands on. So the whole idea of doing something that could alienate your customers is quite interesting. And I think the other thing that we need to think about is the comment which comes up, oh, we've never had a black person in that team, they might not fit in, is it going to be difficult, different? And whether it's gender, whether it's race or whatever it is, being the first to anything, breaking through that glass ceiling, or if you like to, what metaphor you like to use. Clearly I've done it a few times in my career. So I think if you're resilient enough, it can work, but not everybody's going to be resilient enough. And being the first, I think, Lynn, you probably identify with that as well. Being the first isn't always a comfortable place to be, because you are challenging the norm. Other people maybe sometimes do have to adapt. You've got things like conscious, subconscious bias coming in there. People might make assumptions that may or may not be true. Yeah. So I think you've got to be quite a brave person to want to be the first.
I think that's a particularly good point, because that covers any number of diversities. You think about a woman trying to get into an engineering role, they're going to a manufacturing business and it's all blokes in overalls. Being the woman can be incredibly intimidating. Being the first person in a wheelchair going into an office of otherwise able-bodied people, people feel very uncomfortable sometimes if they're not used to working with people who've got obvious disabilities, and they feel they don't know how to talk to them. So it's like working with someone who might be blind. So people feel are they going to be overprotective or whatever. So I think there's this fitting in. How do you, that point about, I think Judeline mentioned about how do you make people actually feel comfortable, the inclusion part, I think it's much harder in some ways than than simply doing the diversity bit. How do you get the first person through the door that breaks the mold, and how do you make them feel that if they come through that door, they are going to feel welcome? I think.
And I think
So,
some of
Richard,
the conversations that you have to have around that might be quite bizarre. I mean, I'm thinking back to when I worked for that well-known insurance company, and I was the first female to do management development back in the early 90s. You know, the rest of the guys in the team saying, we've never had a woman before. Can we swear? Can we tell this joke? You know, they're the kind of things there, right the way through to in the last 12 months or so, you know, working up with, it was within the UK, some of my work was overseas, within the UK, people said, oh, we've never seen anyone with hair like yours around here. Can we touch it? So I think it's the hair thing, which again, anyone who's researched into any of this stuff, it comes up quite a bit. Personally, my view is if you're educated by touching my hair, you can touch my hair. But some people can really take quite offence to that kind of comment as well. Probably Judeline's got more experience, probably dealing with issues maybe where you come across people where that can be quite a big thing for them.
Okay. So a slightly bizarre one. I've never heard that. But anyway, I guess I'm just going to come to Richard and get your view on how you find recruiting. Because I know you have recruited one of your consultants is from one of these Eastern European countries. I can't remember which. Is she Polish, I think?
She's Bulgarian. We've also got another one who's Vietnamese.
Right.
And
which is quite good for a small company.
Sounds like we're collecting it. Sounds like that. I think two or three things. Firstly, just to touch on Lynn's point about wanting to recruit to a range of diversities. There's some really interesting research that looked at businesses who had a positive female graduate recruitment program. What actually happened is it spilled over to other areas. So it shows that if you are open to diversity, and the major beneficiaries were Asian men. And that was the biggest thing. And the surprising thing is, though, that there seems to be a spillover. If you have at least you're open to the idea of diversity, there seems to be a spillover. That's some stuff from Harvard Business Review. The other thing is about people fitting in. Why do we want people to fit in? We want people who are going to, if we want to have innovation, we want to have different people, different thoughts coming in. What we need to do is we need to do that in an environment which is psychologically safe. And that's the point about creating a psychologically safe environment where people feel able to voice their opinions, voice their different experience. The reason why, from a business point of view, why you would want to recruit a diverse workforce is to capture those different experiences, is to capture that different experience of life. If we then go out and we do all we can to recruit this wonderfully diverse workforce, and then we effectively muzzle them, we say you've got to fit into this mold that we've created, we haven't got diversity at all. Right, and yes. That's what we've got to do. We've got to make sure that diversity is part of it, the recruitment process is part of it. The important bit is that once you recruit them in, it has to be into a psychologically safe environment.
So fitting in the sense of feeling welcome to be part of the team, rather than fitting as in conforming to a previous style of fitting in. Okay,
that's it. Exactly. The conformity bit is the important.
Okay,
bit.
I just want to quickly mention. I'm sorry, I forgot this at the beginning. Kayleen, thank you very much for giving me a kick on this one. Judeline very kindly stepped in at the very last minute, and unfortunately has to step out again at 3 o'clock, which means she won't be able to take part in the Q&A. If you have a specific Q&A for Judeline, then you're welcome to put it in the Q&A and flag it, specifically for Judeline, and Kayleen will forward that on, and I'm sure Judeline will be very happy to get in touch if it's a reasonable question she thinks she can answer. I'm probably going to then give Judeline slightly more airtime in the next 30 minutes so that we don't lose out on her experience, but we'll try and balance it out a bit. We've sort of covered a bit about the recruitment. We've covered a bit about how the challenge you face of not just getting people through the door, but making them feel part of the team while still keeping that diversity of thought going. I'm interested in your idea on what then success looks or feels like to you. If you're walking into a business, how would you tell, particularly if you were potentially thinking of joining that company, what are the cultural signs? How do you quickly get a feel beyond simply the visual? that this is a place that welcomes as much diversity of thought as diversity of appearance, behavior, characteristics, all the rest of it. How do you get the feel for what that company is like, and what does success look to you as a business person, as a consultant looking in? So Judeline first, then I'm going to go to Lynn because you have to do the recruitment side, then I'll come to Rachel and then Richard. So Judeline.
So think about your reception and think about how people open a door to get into your reception. And the times I've had to talk to people about, you know, how many steps have you got coming up? Oh, well, we put a ramp out if they need it. Well, they shouldn't have to be asking. They can come round to the back. Well, that shouldn't really be part of it. And once you're in reception, what sort of reception do you get? If you're, you know, we've had challenges in the House of Commons, haven't we, about, you know, only certain MPs can use lifts, and then a person of colour said, you must be the cleaner, you're not allowed to use this lift. So how embracing, how welcoming are we to anyone that comes to our reception? How do we greet them? How do people say your name when you come through reception? I mean, I got an interesting name, combination of names, you know, but Rachel's right, you know, depending on your name, does it get a CV across, you know, before they've even known you or your history? How do they put you in a box, put you in a stereotype box and put you to one side and then deal with the person in charge? Yeah, if you're a female, who's in charge, or do they speak to the bloke in charge? Yeah, if you've got a disability, what's your reception area going to be like in terms of where you can sit or stand or get a glass of water? Yeah, how are you embracing all those very practical small details will give you a clue as how actually open you are. The biggest thing I want to add though is this notion of banter. You don't have to have one person of that category, minority group, to then say, I'm going to watch what I say. You don't have to say, oh, well, we haven't got any black people here, so I'm not going to, you know, that's fine. We can still have a joke. Haven't got any women here, so we can still have a joke. We talk about professional competence. And going back to where Richard started by saying a learning organisation is one that grows all of that professional competence, that says, actually, this is the way we do things around here. Even if we haven't got someone like that in our group, we're still respectful. We still know our rights. We still know our roles and responsibilities, but we're respectful behind all of that as well. So that's what I'm looking for, rather than seeing a lovely, glamorous, you know, these are our values, you know, stenciled against the wall, and people go, oh, I didn't know we meant that. It's walking that talk. It really
that strikes me as a very important point. You've got to actually build that culture before you necessarily have got your diverse workforce, if you want to make it welcoming for when you do get someone from a diverse background. So there isn't that sense, that jarring sense of, oh, now things have to change, which is, you know, I guess the pushback that comes if people aren't prepared. Can I go to Lynn and then to Rachel on this point? Lynn, you obviously work with a huge number of employers and their recruitment policies. I presume at times when normal, you get out to see them and their workplace. What's your take on this, the culture?
Well, your question took me to the times that, so I've been judging the Best Employers Awards for the last 5 or 6, maybe more years with Arch and the Norfolk Business Awards, Cambridge, Suffolk, and our Best Employers Awards. So I go out and I visit a lot of organisations, typically meeting the CEO, HR director, and people in the business. And it's really difficult to be sort of really tangible about it, but it is the feel of the culture that you get if the business is truly diverse. And it's sort of, it kind of comes from the leaders. It comes from talking to the CEO and to the board, and then really being able to, if someone gets it and is passionate about it and just talks about it as part of their DNA, there's a real difference, and you can really sense when they really get it and they're walking the talk with everybody else. So it's kind of difficult, you know, it's difficult to sum up, isn't it? But I can think of organisations that are really, they drive it from the board. They want something inclusive. Might be just, can I just give a quick example of a business that is doing some really good stuff around it at the
Sure.
moment. So it's actually a Suffolk company that I've done a lot of work with, which you probably know because they've won some Best Employer Awards. It's Treat PLC in Bury St Edmunds.
Yep.
So they are a listed business. They manufacture flavourings for a lot of big drinks, beverages, companies, a lot of food. And I got involved with them a couple of years ago when I recruited a non-exec for them to join their board, and they had a woman leaving and they wanted to recruit a woman because the rest of them were men. They had actually some good ethnic, some good international experience on the board, but they were quite a similar age group and they'd worked together for quite a long time. And the chairman said to me, I need to demonstrate it, but I really want that difference. And so we went and we did a search and we had a balance on our shortlist of men and women. And the upshot was that they ended up hiring 2 women. And it's because they knew that they'd got some rotation coming up. So they had an opportunity where they could do that. And one of them was a very experienced HR director that brought in international experience. And the other one was somebody that had been involved with big FMCG businesses, working across the world with them. And she happened to be a Black woman. And this was her first commercial paid non-executive position. And I was wondering at the time, and I thought, she's very different to them. I wonder how it's going to work. But their chairman he just makes sure that everybody listens. And the very fact that they've got 2 women on the board and they've got that difference in international and global perspective and a really good mix has really made them behave differently at board levels. And I've been working with them recently and they've talked about the change it's made. And Yatunda, who joined them as their Black woman, has brought to their attention unconscious bias that they've had, or when they've been behaving in a way which hasn't been inclusive, but they've wanted that feedback and listened and just made lots and lots of small changes. And their business is on such a growth curve. And she joined 15 months ago. There's huge financial results, but you can just feel it across the culture and the impact she's having across the organisation.
That's it's a really good story, and it actually will bring us on to a follow-up question, which actually, Rachel, you can take on if you wish at this stage, which is who leads this, who drives it. But I know you wanted to pick up on some of the comments that have already been made, so come in on that, and then if you want to sort of back that up with who you see as driving it, that'd be great.
No, it's good. Yeah, I completely concur with the examples that you previous 2 speakers have given on this particular point about how do you tell an organisation. I think I can always tell within about half an hour of being in any organisation whether they've taken diversity seriously or not, in as much as if they haven't had awareness of values centred on the wall, etc., and what it means, and being trained in a lot of this stuff, they will start to make inappropriate throwaway comments and jokes and banter, or say things to me like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? No, really? No, I'm really from Norfolk. So that's what I'm just saying. So you can tell really quickly. And of course, they're only trying to be friendly and make small talk. But that's just a quick example. You can tell. In the most extreme cases, a few times in my career, say if a colleague's made an appointment for me to go and visit a business, on a few occasions, because it's only a few occasions, or even if I've spoken to somebody, maybe and arranged to go and see them, I've spoken to myself, you can tell there's a look of shock and horror when I arrive, because in their head, they'll see the name Rachel Blackburn, and what they see in their head, or who the person has spoken to on the phone, they've now got an image in their head, which is a bit different from what's actually presenting them face to face. So clearly that will go one of 2 ways. They'll either adjust quite quickly, or occasionally, maybe it's not been so much with Norfolk businesses. I've no experience with Norfolk business, but certainly 1 or 2 London businesses over the time. Yeah, it's kind of, you're now relegated. Oh, the only people in this building who look like you are the cleaner, and you can see you're not being taken seriously. But I haven't got any examples of that happening in the Norfolk space. So I think that's our focus for today.
Oh, good.
So that's some examples there. And every time something weird happens, my approach is, I think I can learn from that. I can use it as an example to help people understand, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about, people can say it's common sense. What we're talking about today isn't common sense, because if it was common sense, everyone would be getting it right, and we wouldn't have to talk about it. I think it's because a lot of this isn't common sense. We have to bring it to people's awareness. And in terms of who leads and drives the changes, I think Lynn's given a really good example of, I think anybody can sort of express a passion for making things different and better. I know a few different clients are saying they've had people go on the protest marches in the last few weeks, and people at any level in the organisation could come in and challenge the CEO, what we're going to do about it, we need to have change. But at the end of the day, if we need to put time, money, resources, initiatives behind making things different and better in a company, realistically it has to come from the top of the organisation, chairman, CEO, MD, business owner, whatever, if people are really going to have a sustainable difference. And at the moment, when we know coming out of a pandemic, a lot of organisations might want to do something, but they're saying, well, budgets is tight. You know, that is a real dilemma for organisations who want to, on the one hand, do something, but on the other hand, you know, whether it's people who are still furloughed, can we do something yet? Have we got any budget to put behind it? Have we got resources? Have we got time, etc.? They're the kind of dilemmas I think that people are having at the minute. So I'm working with a number of different clients to take a planned approach between now and Christmas, say, when we can start to not miss the moment, because I think there's a risk at the moment. Is it a movement? Is it a moment? There's a risk that, you know, depending on second lockdown, etc., you know, this could sort of fall off the agenda. I do think that is possible. Or everyone could think, oh, we've listened to a talk from Norfolk Chambers, we've done it, tick. I think that's all a risk, and everyone feels much better than now or aware. But I think if we're going to actually help businesses look at what they're doing well at the minute, what they can do differently and better, have some difficult conversations, but maybe get to a better place, I think it has to come from the top.
I think that's really point. I would back up that point and say, if you're listening to this, and thank you to the 22 people who are listening, this isn't it. This is just the start of the conversation. I hope it is a positive start, and I hope you're sitting there in your offices or homes or garden sheds, wherever it may be, and really thinking, how can I contribute to this and in a positive way make this work in my business or my business environment with the networks you have. I think that would be a really good start. And what I'd ask is, what could the Norfolk Chambers do more beyond this? And this is not a question for now, but this is a question to think about for the attendees. What could the Norfolk Chambers of Commerce do to help you do more on this diversity inclusion front? Judeline, I'll come to you because I know you're short of time. Richard, can I hold you off for a second? Because I do want to come to you and talk to you about behavioural economics and changing behaviour. Judeline, yes, sorry.
I do apologise, Richard. I'll keep this brief. And it's building on something that Rachel said about it's got to come from the top. I agree with her, it has got to come from the top, but you don't have to have all the answers at the top. That's so important. That strong leadership says, I don't know sometimes, maybe I need to go and ask someone how to do this. Yeah, that's absolutely crucial in terms of the strength of a leadership to be able to say that. And I also want to put on the table that by saying I don't know and engaging the workforce, create a support group that says we're actually going to look at the whole notion of diversity. I'm not saying create a women's group. I'm not saying create a Blackburn. I'm talking about diversity, and it's so you can actually learn. They can go out and make links. They can go out and do the research. They could come back and say, we think we could be doing this, we're not. Really investing in your talent pool is so important. And if you are an organisation that talks about corporate social responsibility, this is one way of actually saying governance is there, because we can go to our education, we could go to schools. We can actually start encouraging the younger, newer talent into our organisation by really having those conversations. So I just wanted to put that on, and it costs nothing. People say we haven't got the money to do diversity. It doesn't cost you anything but having a conversation. How brave are you to have that conversation? How willing are you to look at the new world that's out there to really invest in? I do some work around, language. Yeah, and people go, I know French and I know Spanish. How much have we invested in BSL in our schools?
Sorry?
How much have we invested in having British Sign Language in our schools?
British Sign Language. Okay, sorry.
We have language taught, but VSL is always an afterthought. You can do it as an evening class when you leave school. Well, let's talk about how can we make sure we are communicating with people, and not just about a foreign language. It's BSL. It's part of our world, but it's a poor relation. Let's bring it up. Let's influence communities. Let's engage with them. So we don't have to have the answer. We are continually going through that learning organisation, reinvesting, and it doesn't mean it's got to be £1 to be invested. So I needed to put that on the table. Sorry, I just felt.
No, that's really good, because actually, Judeline, it's important because actually Richard mentioned this yesterday about businesses, the role of business in engaging with the wider community, and particularly young people, particularly in marginalized areas of the community, who might not have see opportunities in business and not see that they've got a route in. So I'd like to come to Richard on this, and it's sort of just expanding on the point. I did have a few other questions, but I think really where we are is to expand on this idea of who's leading this, and what does the how can we as businesses and the business community do more to embed this in our, not just in our internal culture, but in our overall business culture in Norfolk?
Well, there's been some interesting research on what doesn't work, and some of it's counterintuitive, really. Having compulsory diversity training doesn't work. It's having voluntary diversity training works very well. So if you as a business leader, you facilitate diversity training, then the people who buy into it will immediately start to buy into this whole idea of diversity. When we talk about behavioural change, the behavioural change happens best if we make a small change and people buy into that small change. They'll then develop into far larger change. If we try and force people to do something, whatever it is, we'll all naturally push against it. So sometimes when we're thinking about these things, we need to think of it, really think about the behavioural impacts of it. Another one which is really strange is grievance procedures. You'd think grievance procedures would give people a voice, and so therefore they'd be very positive. Of course, you have to have grievance procedures because, as Reg said earlier on, there's legal consequences of these things. But unfortunately, what tends to happen is that people who raise grievances tend to get punished by the managers further down the line. Either it will be looked on as awkward people or whatever. So what you should have grievance procedures, but you shouldn't think that that's going to solve your diversity problem. What you should do is you should take account of the fact it's probably going to cause more problems. And you shouldn't view having no grievances as being a positive thing. If you view having grievances as having grievances rather than having no grievances as being positive, then it shows that your people feel psychologically safe to raise a grievance and they feel they're going to be heard. What happens is if you have something which has no grievances at all, chances are it's because people don't feel there's any point in raising the grievance. And so it's just hiding the problem rather than opening it up. What you can have instead of that is you can have more flexible grievance arrangements. So rather than having a formal grievance hearing, what you have instead is you just encourage a conversation with the people who've fallen out. And so you discuss it. So then it doesn't become a point of conflict. There's no winners and losers in that. It's just a point of, I'm sorry I've upset you, and we can move on from, we can work out a way so it won't happen again. So those sorts of things, other things like testing candidates. You would think that giving candidates tests so that you're recruiting solely on the candidate's individual ability would be a good thing. Again, what tends to happen is the tests are used against minorities and they're ignored in terms of sort of a white male flunks a maths test for an investment bank. They'll probably just ignore the test results because they liked him at interview or whatever because he was like them, went to the same school and everything. Whereas if a black female does that, then they'll probably really pick out at all test results. So things which we think are going to be positive aren't necessarily so. And so we just need to think around that. Also, when we're looking at, most of us, if we've got degrees or qualifications or anything, we don't use that degree for our job. We use it to get through the door. We're just using our sort of mouse to do our job. So rather than looking at the individual's sort of explicit skills, look at the impact they will have on the team dynamics. And so an analogy for investment is sometimes we will in a low risk portfolio, we'll put in one particular high risk investment. And the reason why we're doing that is because it doesn't correlate with the low risk investments. So when they fall, it will rise by more than they will fall, and vice versa. So we have this high risk investment in the portfolio, which reduces the overall risk of the portfolio. And you have a similar sort of thing, but with employees. If you can get the right mix of employees, so you're recruiting for their impact on the team rather than their individual bits. McKinsey had this idea about if you want to create a high performing team, you don't get people who are sort of good all-rounders. If you get good all-rounders, they won't have any high performing elements. What you have is a very difficult team to manage because they have lots of people who are very good in one particular area, and you fill all those gaps. And that way you get a team that's above average performance rather than just an average performing team. So yeah, I've rabbited now. Someone else have a go.
I think it's very good. I'd like to just pick up on a little bit there, because in a way you're touching on with the interviews and the recruitment, this thing of cultural capital, that certain tests are, just because they've been devised by white men in HR departments, they reflect their own internal cultural capital, their own internal biases as well. And in a broad sense, we all have biases. It's how we think. Our world is shaped by our instant takes on things. So if you have tests that are shaped around one person's particular bias towards cultural capital, people who aren't in that same area will lose out, even though they might have plenty to contribute from another experience. Yeah. I think maybe if I could come, I'm conscious that Judeline's going soon. This is not to rush you away, Judeline, but can I come to Judeline first and then go to Lynn on this? Because I think this whole thing of how do you deal with those inherent biases, those natural biases we all have in our cognitive thinking? How do you start to recognize those and address them? Because in a way, we have to have biases in our head because that's how we think. It's a shorthand. It's just an evolutionary thing. We make a quick judgment call on, whether to buy the greenwashing up liquid or something. It's a branding thing in our head. Those are biases. They can be good, but they can also be bad. How do we compensate for that, Judeline?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Biases are there, our unconscious biases there to protect us. There's some research out there that says we have 576,000 thoughts a day. Now, if I was aware of all those thoughts, I'd need to lie down in a dark room with a flannel over my head. So we have to survive in some way. And that's why, and it's controversial, I know, but I do think addressing how unconscious bias works is key to some of this, because it's reflecting on where do we get that message, and in that past, I'm pointing in the back here, in the past, it made sense, but where we are, is that actually true? Can we actually really tease that apart? So Richard's quite right. I think there is an opportunity for groups of people to come together to talk about it, call it a learning experience, call it a workshop. I wouldn't call it training, but I certainly call it facilitation, because you need someone there to enable that conversation to happen. And I think he's absolutely right. Mandatory doesn't work. And I truly believe that in diversity, we have something to celebrate. And who doesn't want to go to a party and celebrate? So that's part of the learning. How do we grow in terms of a sense of fulfillment on that? So the thing about that, though, is that once it becomes conscious, what are the consequences if we carry on behaving in that way? So it's not a case of we've done the Norfolk Chambers course, whatever. So what are the consequences? What you're doing is wrong. Morally, we can debate that. For the business, there's going to be consequences. But also, if you cross that line and you end up in a tribunal, it is not a pretty place. So we have to be able to, our duty of care, make that known to everyone that we're working with, on all those different levels. And unconscious bias is part of that. Where did we get it from? How is it impacting? What does it look like? What is this words that we're using? What does it imply when we talk about people in that way? If we don't consider it, then it doesn't get measured. So I think it's all those things together. So thank you very much. And I am conscious of the time. Can I say to everyone, thank you for letting me be here. And if you want to carry on the conversation, I can talk forever about this. So please link me on LinkedIn and I'll continue it. And thank you very much for having me. I will drop out in the next couple of minutes, though. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming at the last minute. I will send you a LinkedIn request, definitely. It's been a great pleasure having you on, and really appreciate all your contribution. I'm sorry you can't stay, but do understand. Lynn, can I come to you and think about, just to expand on this thing, presumably with recruitment, you're very aware of all the tests that get done and how they get shaped and how that then affects who you're recruiting before they've even stepped through the door, even possibly even considered submitting a CV. Is this something you are trying to tackle, and if so, how? Or is it something that is so embedded it's very hard to tackle? How do you take it?
Well, it's interesting because, well, from a tests perspective, I think of personality profiles, questionnaires. We use IRAS, we use their products a lot when we recruit. And I think then it's trying to make sure that you use them in the right way, that you just don't look at a report and take it at face value. You know, the purpose of it being there is that it gives you further information to ask questions and to find out, for it to be a catalyst to find out more about that individual, and then to really listen to their experiences, and, you know, which actually is it can be so valuable, because it gives you the opportunity to really listen to someone's experience and then bring that in almost when you're in the workplace to support them or to notice. So kind of I guess I've got 2 points I wanted to make. On the listening thing, I think one of the key ways that we can really challenge ourselves is by creating an environment where we've got great role models that are happy to talk about their experiences, and that we create a safe space for them, if you like, so that we encourage people to be honest about what's great, what's not. And if we've got people in our workplaces that are from diverse backgrounds, how can we give them a bit of a platform and really, really listen to what it's been like for them? Because I think, and talking a little bit to Rachel yesterday, there's some experiences that you've had, Rachel, which that you shared, that you just kind of bat away. You just think, oh, that's how it is. But actually, if some of us knew that, we wouldn't behave that, because we don't want to create that. But that's where some of the unconscious bias happens. It's just things that patterns we've always taken on. So when we run our women's leadership program, a lot of people, Judeline, you mentioned before about women's leadership, like networking events. I think whether they're networking events or groups, they can be really effective, because it does create quite a safe space for people to really share and to explain what might be going on for them. And if you are in a more of a mixed environment, some of those perhaps thought patterns or insecurities or things they wanted to share would probably be suppressed, and they wouldn't feel comfortable to share them. So those sorts of groups, whether it is inclusion, diversity groups, is really good thing. Really thinking in our businesses about who we've got and who we can really learn, and being open-minded to listen. I think those are the things that are springing to my mind. I don't know if that's completely answered your question, Huw, so please feel free to.
I know. I think it does. I mean, as much as any question is answered. So I think it's more about getting your insight into the process and what works and what doesn't work. I think is where I'm coming from. I mean, the whole of this is a huge learning process for me. So I'm sitting here trying to host this, thinking I really am out of my depth in terms of understanding. You know, because we're a small business, and we work with clients across Europe. And because we work remotely, it never crosses my mind as to what the other person looks like. Most of the time I don't see them, I just talk to them. It's not an issue. So I don't know what, it's more about, I just focus on the business rather than, so that's remote working in isolation. You don't get to see it in quite the same way as if you're part of a big team. So this is all quite refreshing for me. Because it's changed since I worked in corporate life 20 years ago.
Yeah. One point I perhaps just might be relevant just raising here is I work with through our women's leadership program, we work with organisations as well about don't just fix the women, you know, like actually how do you create environments which are inclusive and that enable people to thrive and everybody to thrive. And a lot of leaders I speak to, they say with absolutely the best intent that I don't recognise gender. It's just I'll recruit the best person for the job, or I don't recognise ethnic diversity. It's about who's the right person. And hi, Judeline.
Hi, Judeline.
And I know that that is said with absolutely the best intent, but I think it's kind of missing the point, because if you don't recognise it, if we don't recognise that there is an imbalance, and if we want to create more inclusive environments, we need to pay attention to it. That's actually how change is achieved, not by just sort of thinking we're doing the right thing.
Okay, that's a good point. I'm going to, you've almost wrapped up on that sounded almost like a concluding point, but I'm going to come back to you for a concluding point. So I'm conscious of the time. It's just gone 3 o'clock. Judeline's have to leave. I see we've got 10 questions popped up. I haven't even looked at them yet, and I've got 3 on my page because I think we've covered Aisha's. Sorry, Aisha, I've got your name wrong. I apologise. I've got 3 others on my page here. I've got 10 on screen, which might be duplicated. So I'm going to have a quick look at those. While I'm looking at those, could I just go around, starting with Rachel and then Richard, just for about a minute each, is really about what would be the one sort of piece of advice to a company, particularly if they're starting up or they're a small company, they're thinking of expanding, they're thinking of trying to grow. What would be the best way for them to start to improve diversity and inclusion? What would really help them along? Maybe it's a book they should read, or a film they should watch, or a group they should join, or should they? Is there an experience they should go through to really appreciate what it means to be from a diverse background that isn't their own? Are there things you can do that way? Is there a role playing? What sort of thing can you get to do that you think would really help people understand the issues, make that change and start? So I'll go to Rachel first and then Richard. While you're talking, I am sort of listening, but I'm also looking at the questions.
So really good question. So I think, first of all, in terms of what somebody should go through, I think everybody's at a different part of their journey. I think, as has been touched on earlier on, we're all shaped by different experiences. So if we've got experience of BSL, then we'd have known what BSL was, for example. So I think we're all kind of diverse in our own way, in our own experiences. What one person might need to do might be different from what somebody else might find beneficial. One of the things that I've done to help with this is, over the last few weeks, put together a new kind of what I'm calling my diversity inclusion framework, which, whilst it can then be shaped around each organisation, actually is a framework that encourages people to start off by saying, well, what's your vision? What are you trying to achieve? How does that link to your values in the organisation? Not in a way that it's on the wall, but in a way you can make them live and breathe and get excited about them, and they're going to add commercial benefit as well. And then it's about saying, okay, where you are today, and actually getting people to audit, maybe in the board meeting, to audit, okay, against our vision, what are the things that we're currently doing well? What are we getting right? What we're really excited about and happy to showcase? Equally, what are the things that we're not doing so well? Where are our gaps? And then following on from that, starting to, as Lynn said earlier on, starting to look at what are we going to measure? So as a board, as the top team, what should we actually measure? Back to said earlier, what gets measured gets taken seriously. And once you've done that, looking at what you want to measure, then what's the action plan to move from where you are today to where you need to be? And that's going to vary for every organisation, depending what field you're in, what business you're in, whether you're B2B, B2C, etc. But having a look across the whole piece. I mean, in the, I can think of a Norfolk business I won't name, but they're trying to sell to the Middle East, and they've got pictures of bacon in a lot of their website. So I think to have a look at the whole piece of all the internal and external bits, what's going well, what's not going so well, and depending on the size of your team, involving different team members to comment through, if you're a large organisation, through staff reps, but equally small organisation, getting every team to do a bit of an audit almost.
Okay, good stuff. Richard, I'll come to you.
Well, really sort of looking at it from a small business perspective, we're a tiny firm. There's 9 of us, so we've got limited potential for diversity. But we've got a supply chain, we've got clients, we've got some talk before about what happens if a client is racist. Do we want that client? And I think there's all those sorts of things. I think we really need to sort of set out our stall as to the type of people we want to work with as well, so we can extend that diversity beyond our internal diversity to an external diversity as well. And I think it's important. I think it's important that if a client, we do have, as was mentioned before, we've got someone who came from Eastern Europe and also someone whose family come from Vietnam. And certainly when 9 years ago, when Raddy joined us, there were some people who said to me, not clients, but some people said to me, are you doing the right thing? Will clients be happy with this? And I hadn't given any thought really. But when I did think about it, I thought, well, if they are unhappy with it, then unfortunately it's the clients that are going to go, not Raddy. And it has to be that attitude. And I think that's right, because I think if you start pandering to that, then your other clients won't want to work with you either. The ones who didn't reject her, the 99, well actually the 100% who didn't reject her, but that. So I think that's important, that you set out your stall and you understand where you're coming from. I think also just trying to get as much contact. I don't recognize any of these people as being any different to me because I work with them day in, day out. I remember when, just after Ceausescu's regime fell, I went across to Romania to work in a mental hospital. And when I first got there, I couldn't relate properly to disabled people. This hospital was full of disabled people, and I couldn't. I just didn't know how to relate. By the time I'd been there a couple of weeks, all of that disappeared completely. They're just people, and we were sort of hugging them at the end and things like that. And it's just this contact, and just so you don't notice the differences. That's what we need to get to. We need to get to the point where there is no difference. We like or we don't like someone for reasons that are entirely down to their personality, not their colour, not their accent, not some accent of birth. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, Lynn, thank you, Richard. I think this ability to talk and understand and relate to people is a tricky one. If you're not used to talking about diversity, and you're not used to talking to people from diverse backgrounds, whatever that might be, disability or whatever, I think it can be a blockage for people. It makes it hard. Lynn, can I ask you to wrap up with a view on this? What's your sort of number one?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, my number one thing is, if from a recruitment perspective, then when you are recruiting, whoever is owning that recruitment, I'd really encourage you to kind of be really clear that you expect some diversity, and to challenge that, to really find out whether you're using an outsource or you've got someone managing it internally, really to say, what have you actually really done differently to try and get more diversity onto that shortlist. So that's one thing. I read a really interesting tip, which I really liked, in a book that Rachel recommended to me, that I've read, which I've got here. Don't know if anyone else has, but this is a great...
What's the book? Can you hold it up again?
So, Rennie Edo Lodge, who's a journalist, who's a Black woman who, and you probably can't see it all, the way it's done, it's called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. So okay. The title made me intimidated, I will tell you. I will be like, oh my God, like, what have I done wrong? And it's so enlightening, and it's written in a way from her experience. Like, she's very honest, and she's highlighted a number of things that really has made me think differently. So I'd definitely recommend that. And my final tip, which I can circulate this afterwards, is the thing that really got me, that was the catalyst to make me think broader about how we look at diversity, is a blog that I mentioned earlier, Yutunda, a lady called Yutunda Hoffman, who has joined Treat. She's a non-exec on their board. She's also got her own consultancy. Occasionally she writes blogs, and she is a very, very eloquent writer. And she wrote a blog back in June about the murder of George Floyd, George Floyd, I think that's right, and her perspective, just very light touch, her perspective on it, but also just slightly about her experiences growing up as a Black woman. And she encouraged her readers to not be a bystander to it. And that's the thing that was a great catalyst for me, that started, me thinking differently. And I thought, I don't know what I can do, but I don't want to just be a bystander to it. But I want to find my way of doing it. So it's a very, very light touch, quick read, but anyone might be interested to have a look, see if it resonates.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate all the comments. We did have quite a lot of questions. We're not going to have time to go through them all. I'd like to pick out, it picks in part on what Richard was saying about disability and the language of disability, and something that Judeline was saying about your reception and welcoming people. It's a question, well, there was a question earlier from Adrian Pickering, who's founder at Robotica, around how organizations prepare for and fund provision for people with disabilities and in the recruitment. And I know we've got a few questions. I'm not going to go through them all, and people have marked them anonymous, but around the idea that what practical steps can employers and businesses take to be more inclusive, the idea that we've got a sizable number of disabled people in Norfolk, and when speaking with local businesses about hiring disabled people, how many employees they have who identify as disabled. People don't necessarily measure it, so how can external organizations influence businesses to be more inclusive and diverse? So there's an element around there about, I think, how we think about diversity and how we possibly actually physically adjust workspaces so that they are welcoming, particularly for disabled people, whether it's partially sighted, blind, wheelchair, or whatever, which I think was something that Judeline was saying, you have to get that in place before someone has to join, otherwise they don't feel welcome when they walk through the reception. And I think there's also then in some of these questions, how you might influence, and I think you've touched on this, Richard, how you might influence your supply chain, both clients and suppliers, in their thinking. How do you react if you think that your part of your supply chain is not diverse and inclusive, or is resistant to you being diverse and inclusive? So I'm not going to try and pin that down as a tight question, because these questions have been reflected in various ways across 9 or 10 different comments here. So I'm going to come to Rachel and just see if you want to pick up on any points around there, particularly around maybe that preparing the workplace, even if you haven't got someone who fits the box for a particular diversity. How do you prepare that attitude and that physical space for people who might need a different environment to make it inclusive?
Yeah, so for me, it goes back to, I think, some of the stuff I said earlier on about looking at each organisation, looking at what you're doing well at the moment. I'm sure there are lots of things that every organisation is doing well at the moment, but I think recognising a lot of this discrimination will happen unintentionally. So it is about looking at, trying to look at the world, walking somebody else's shoes, so to speak, metaphorically. Trying to look at the world from, if you do have different disabilities or different needs or whatever it might be, trying to look at it in terms of, is this a welcoming place, yes or no? So I think that's a good starting point there. And then each organisation will be different depending on what the audit reveals, therefore what the action plan needs to be. And probably the action plan will need time, effort, resources, money, etc. behind it to do something about it at the end of the day. There are very few things you can do without putting any time or resources behind something to achieve change. In terms of supply chain, I think most of us have been through, I said make an assumption, and maybe we haven't all been through it, but recognising modern slavery. So I think it's recognising most of us will be looking at in our supply chains to make sure we haven't got any modern slavery in our supply chain. So we're meant to have our policies, etc. out there. And so it's the same for diversity, making sure that when we have our annual reviews or our business planning meetings or strategic overviews, whatever we do in our businesses, making sure this is almost on our checklist of things that we need to kind of stand back and look at, in the same way looking at all our revenue and our overheads and everything else, making sure we include things like the modern slavery, the mental health things, the diversity things, almost on the checklist of things that we do actually report on, no matter what sort of organisation are. If you're a privately funded organisation, you can still hold yourself accountable to make sure that you're doing all the right things across the supply chain, and therefore making the right statements and right images, etc. on your website, your internal, your external communications, your social media, etc. So anybody, that should mean that you're attractive, so people want to work with you across your supply chain. But equally, if you've got any evidence that you're not working with the right people, then it's a chance for, as Lynn says, are you going to be a bystander and put up with it and just think, oh, well, I didn't notice that they said that racist comment or that disability joke or whatever? Or are you actually going to be somebody who's not a bystander, does something proactively to actually do something about it?
Okay. Lynn, I'd like to come to you on this, but I'd also like to put a particular point to you, which is something that cropped up in one of the questions, which is around applications, particularly people with disabilities, or whether that's physical or learning disabilities, that certain forms of applications, perhaps online applications, are barriers to applying for certain roles. So even the way the openings you give to people can restrict even people coming forward to say, I'd like to go for that role. They just hit that barrier and you don't even know it. So is there something particularly around that from a recruitment point of view that maybe you're addressing or you're thinking about, or that you've come across that works?
Some of our clients, I would say particularly around Cambridge, have definitely got a thing now where they want to anonymise all CVs so that they're not prejudiced at all if they see different names, for example. And actually, they're taking sort of all reference in terms of gender, whether people are married, whether they're single, you know, sort of, they're quite anonymising it so that they are really genuinely trying to judge on people's skills. And that is changing the diversity and the recruitment mix. It's sort of tied into some unconscious bias. When there are things like online tests, I can't sort of, you know, talk for all businesses, but that is quite common, particularly in graduate schemes, or where there's sort of high volume recruitment, where it's very, very difficult to sort of screen. You know, at the moment, recruitment agencies are a real challenge because there are so many people that are applying for some of the jobs that you're trying to give a personal service, but it's kind of slightly impossible to do that, and you're not trying to. So, I mean, I'd be really interested to hear if you know, if there's anything that we're doing which is putting barriers in place, then I'd love to hear about it, just to sort of, you know, question ourselves and to make sure that we are being as inclusive as we can in the recruitment process. But you know, use of technology is such a key skill, I guess, in like most businesses today, that sort of going through an online route, I guess, if not, a lot of companies sort of will then have an alternative of how people can apply if there's any reason they can't do that. I don't know if that answers the question, or right. But I think it's a kind of a learning thing, and it's interesting to hear.
I think it is interesting what you're saying, because I know that on the recruitment side, a lot of companies, particularly big companies, are using more and more automated systems for initial screening. They're sort of automated applicant tracking systems, I think they're called, and they're sort of artificial intelligence-based systems to do the initial screening for certain skills and whatever. But of course, if you are restricted in what you can use in technology, you might be able to contribute wonderfully to a role, but if the process you have to go through to get that role just physically excludes you, you're never going to get through the door. So I think maybe
it comes down to, does the job itself mean that you need to use that technology? Does the recruitment process reflect what the job actually needs? Right. I know a lot of the big firms, when they're doing graduate schemes, a lot of them are challenging themselves to sort of say, it's not going to be just about you've got to have a 2:1 degree or above. It's not that you need to have been to certain schools. And actually, a lot of them are tracking and they are actively trying to measure their recruitment and saying, what diversity are we bringing in at that earlier level, and changing their recruitment processes so that they are quite inclusive. But, you know, if you don't like using technology, but one of the things I'm thinking about is, as we're working all remotely and sitting here now, you'd have no idea if I was sitting in a wheelchair or not. And I'm just wondering if actually this remote working could help break down some of those barriers that traditionally, when you go into an office, people have a certain reaction, you know, a different reaction to it, to you or to the individual. So,
yeah, I think that's a very fair point. Richard, can I bring you in on and see if you've got a particular take on any of these questions around the barriers to recruitment?
Well, I suppose when we think about behavioural change, we sort of think about things like nudge theory and things, and there's two elements to that. One is environmental change and environmental supports for people to make behavioural change, and the other is individual. We talked a lot about supporting the individual, but what we can do in terms of the environment is we can look at the structure of our firm. And so we know, for example, that small self-managed teams will tend to encourage more diversity. If we then go one beyond that, we can look to a sort of holacratic structure where you've got overlapping self-managed teams. So those members of the minorities, whatever they are, get an opportunity to operate more closely with other people in the organisation and throughout the organisation. That sort of structural change can help encourage diversity, and that is what we would call an environmental nudge, because it's nothing, people don't recognise it as being something to encourage diversity, but the effect is that by operating your business in that way, it's likely to encourage encourage diversity and diverse behaviours. So those sorts of things. So really getting people to really stand back 2 or 3 steps and look at the sort of bigger picture, the implications. What I was saying before about some of these things which seem obvious at first take, but actually when you look at them properly, they actually have the opposite effect to what you need. I think that's really my key, is that you can either just run in and do this, or you can stand back, think strategically, and think, actually, yeah, I'm really going to do this. I'm going to do this to the advantage of my firm. I'm going to do it by looking at how we're structured. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to change the holacracy, but something where we're looking at everything to really maximize the benefit of this for everybody. That would be my takeaway, really. Okay.
That's superb. Thank you so much. I'm just looking here and I'm trying to cover some of these. Some of the questions are really quite long, so not really questions, they're more statements. We won't necessarily cover them all. Just picking up a comment here from Anna Madison, just saying that on fitting in, she's recommending a book called Peacocks in the World of Penguins. A great book, illustrates the point about fitting in, and that she's used in some leadership development sessions in the past. So Peacocks in the World of Penguins. I hadn't heard of it, but it sounds fascinating. I know, Lynn, you were recommending, what was the title of the book? Why I'm Not Talking to White People About Race?
That's it.
Okay, so that's another book. Do any of you have any other books that you particularly value that have helped you think about this topic? I think sometimes being able to read other people's experience, or even if it's just a business book from someone from a different world view, that might help. Richard?
Not a book, but if you Google Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and look for any of her TED Talks, she did a really good talk with the Economist. They're just brilliant. She's, I think she's Ghanaian, but she might be Nigerian, but I'm pretty certain she's Ghanaian. And she's just brilliant. She's a great author anyway, I think, but her talks around diversity, not just racial diversity, but also around feminism, just wonderful. So if you're interested in this sort of stuff and you want to hear a very eloquent, very witty young lady talking about it, then she's your girl.
What was her name again?
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I may have pronounced that wrong, in which case shoot me down. If you just Google Chimamanda, which is like Amanda, only with a CHIM on the front.
Right, okay.
And if you just Google Chimamanda and then either TED Talk or Economist, then they'll come up.
Brilliant, lovely. Rachel, is there anything sort of reading or inspiring that we should be looking at that, to help broaden our views on this? Whatever the topic, the whole diversity inclusion.
Well, I would say a couple of things. Clearly, in terms of the book, the one that Lynn mentioned earlier on is the one, certainly, because I think it's got a lot of good points in. The one that's been mentioned a couple of times already. I would say a couple of things. Clearly, if anybody is interested in the slide deck that I put together, which I think is quite provocative to get you thinking, then again, if you want to link in with me, whatever, I can get that over to you. The other thing I would suggest is that just be aware. I think my perception is, rightly or wrongly, that people on the call today probably in the upper quartile of people who are aware of this kind of stuff. But I think as we look around, I think we see good examples in the press and in media, whatever. I think in blogs, in articles, see good examples all the time where it makes you think that, yeah, we want to be like that. Equally, look out for examples where people aren't getting it right. And there are examples all over the show. I just mentioned to the panel in the last couple of weeks, I've just seen on social media where businesses, well-respected businesses, are still advertising for people putting their gender into it. It's obvious they've got in their mind what they see is when they're advertising for a person, it's not a neutral advert, it's very gender specific. So they're the kind of practical things I think we can all look out for every day and challenge ourselves. Are we actually making stereotypes about who we actually want to recruit, who we think that is going to be great for the next role, opportunity, the promotion or whatever? Are we making assumptions? So I think we can do a lot to challenge our own assumptions, our own conscious or self-conscious bias, and we all do it. I think we all do it. I do. I can make assumptions about people. I'm not perfect, clearly. We've all got to work on ourselves every day.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. I'd like to, I think we were very close to wrapping up. So, and I'm just looking to Kayleen here for a thumbs up. I think we're at 27 minutes past. So I will come quickly around the panel for one last final. If you've got anything to say, you don't have to say anything if you feel you've said enough. I'd just like to say thank you to Adrian Pickering, who's just put a top tip. Access to work grants can mean that hiring disabled people need not cost your business. So you can make, he's added to this, you can make changes to your workplace and processes. Many people with disabilities will welcome the idea of you asking them to guide you on what changes would be helpful. Everyone is different. There is no need to make assumptions. Adrian, thank you very much. That's a very good point. So access to work grants, if you're thinking, gosh, yeah, we'd like to do more, there are grants out there. I'm sure that the LEPS Growth Hub will help you with grants if you're looking to change the layout of your workplace to make it more accessible. That would definitely be, I think, something they would help with. I think there's a lot we can do around thinking. I like particularly your checklist idea for, when you're thinking about your suppliers and your contractors. I was asked to complete a diversity form for a large company last year, and they were asking about our diversity in our workplace, and I put down that it was myself and my wife, so we scored 50-50 on the board, which my client did point out was actually quite rare for most of their clients, but I think we were exceptional in being so small. So it's hard to get that wrong. And it doesn't take account of who the actual real boss is in the room. So can I just go around the table very quickly? We've got a minute here. If I go Richard, Rachel, Lynn, have you got anything more you'd like to add? Any final nugget of wisdom? Because you've all contributed so much. It's been brilliant. Richard?
Probably not, the only thing I'd like to say is just we've got an opportunity. Everything's changing. Let's take the momentum of that change and let's make some real change in the right direction. Okay.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would clearly echo Richard's comments there and encourage people to think not just in line with the Equality Act, protected characteristics, think of the whole range of diversity, the cognitive stuff, the physical, mental ability, appearance, social status, the whole kind of range, and make sure we get the best people, giving the best opportunities to the right people. There's going to be a win-win-win situation for us, the individual, our customers, etc. And the Norfolk economy.
Lovely. Lynn, final word from you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this discussion. So thanks everyone. And I want to say thanks to the Norfolk Chamber for being proactive about picking up on the debate. And Kayleen, you picked that up and said, why don't we do something about it? So I want to say thank you. And you asked a question, what could the Norfolk Chamber do? Is there anything more that you could do to make sure this isn't just a moment, but we have a movement? And one thought I've had is, could we provide a bit of a platform where we identify successful people or people that are doing different things across Norfolk that are from diverse backgrounds and actually showcase that? Because role models do make a difference, and that will impact our pipeline and the young people coming through if they've got great role models to see. Don't know how it could work, but happy to chat further about it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who has listened in and taken part, and thank you. I'm sorry if we haven't answered all your questions. We've tried to answer them as best we can where we can. Some of them were quite long, so I'm still trying to work out actually what the question was with some of them. it does make it quite tricky, but I think we've covered a lot of ground in that hour and a half. I hope people have found it useful. And I hope if you take anything away from this, that this is just the start of a conversation. And I think possibly that would be helpful if you've got ideas for how Norfolk Chambers or other business organisations like the LEP and others can help push this idea of diversity and inclusion across all the different categories and people and attitudes, and open it up and make it more, make it easier for people to talk about the issues. I think that would be handy. So I think submitting them, I guess, as comments on this session when it goes live. I think we have been recording. It will be then edited for smoothness, I think, and then it will go sort of on the. Is that Kayleen? Tell me, will this be on the Chamber website, I take it, or YouTube channel, or?
Yeah, so we'll upload it to our YouTube channel and we'll put it on our website, but I'll definitely do a post on LinkedIn so people can then comment. If not, you can go to our website and you'll be able to find our hello inbox. I'll also put it on the chat, but I know a lot of people have gone. Yeah, feel free to contact us or give us a call and we'll happily talk to you.
Okay, so I mean, Anna, Madison, I think that answers your question. Will you be circulating the recording? Yes, we will, and by all means do share it and see how we can take this conversation forward. Excellent, thank you very much. Oh, one more, thank you. Thank you all, very inspiring and refreshing. Thank you, Ross, for that feedback, and thank you to everyone else. There have been various comments along those lines. So just leaves it to me to say thank you, Rachel, Lynn, Richard, and Judeline, for all your contributions. Thank you also to Kayleen for organising this, for all the techie support and for helping with the initial sort of briefing sessions. It's been really good. And thank you to everyone who's listened in for taking the time. It's been a great pleasure. Have a good afternoon.